Hey guys, and welcome to another very exciting Blender tutorial. After you've created your brand new great looking 3D model, it's likely going to come out looking pretty naked. Now, I have already talked about how to create and apply simple materials, but I have not yet talked about one of the most fundamental techniques for dressing up your 3D models, and that is how to apply an image texture to it. The challenge here is that your 3D model is, well, three-dimensional. However, image textures are flat, there are only 2 dimensions, so how do we tell Blender how this 2D image texture is going to fit and stretch over this 3D model? For that, we have to create something called a UV map. This UV map tells Blender which part of your image texture is going to map to which part on the 3D model. The reason this is called a UV map is that every point on your 3D model, every vertex, is assigned an additional 2-dimensional coordinate containing a U and V value. These UV coordinates are then laid out on this UV map and therefore mapped to a specific position on this 2-dimensional image texture. This then tells Blender how this 2-dimensional image texture is going to fit onto this 3-dimensional model. The process of creating this UV map is, no surprise, called UV mapping, and you can do it either via UV projection or by unwrapping your 3-dimensional model. In this tutorial, I want to show you exactly how that is done so that you are no longer surrounded by your naked 3D models. You're welcome. Welcome to Blender. I have a very simple scene set up here with a little Minecraft creeper, and as you can see, I have no texture applied to this guy at all. Also, if you do want to follow along with this tutorial, you will be able to download this file from our website, so simply hop over to surfacedstudio.com/downloads and you'll be able to download this file, pop it open and follow along. If you render out the scene by pressing F12 on your keyboard, you can see that I've already got the lights and the camera set up, but it looks pretty plain, right? Because this little guy has no texture whatsoever, so let's look at how we can fix that. Let's press Escape to return to the 3D view, come to the bottom left-hand side to set 3D view to the 3 little diagonal lines, click and drag towards the right to split this view down the middle vertically, and then I'm going to change my left view from the 3D view over to the UV/image editor. And right now, this has the previous render result in it, but we can simply clear that out by coming to the bottom of the UV image editor and pressing on this white little X here. So we've got a really nice and clean empty slate. And you can zoom in and out with the mouse wheels, by the way, middle mouse click and drag to navigate around. And this is the area where we're going to define our UV layout and where we're going to load in the texture that we actually want to apply to our model. Now, in order to define UVs on any model in your scene, you need to go into edit mode. So make sure you select your creeper. By the way, you can press the period on your numpad to kind of hone in on the little guy. Then press tab to go into edit mode. And on the left hand side of the 3D view, you will find the tool shelf, which you can show and hide by pressing T on your keyboard. And the third tab down from the top is going to be your shading/UV options. And let me actually make this UV image editor just a little bit smaller. So I'm just going to drag this over so we can see our 3D view just a little bit better. And in the shading/UV tabs, you will find options to create and manage your UV layout. Now, in order to define UVs on this guy, you may notice that this creeper, let's press Z on our keyboard, actually consists of multiple primitives. So there's multiple cubes, one for the head, one for the neck/body, and one cube for each of these feet. Also in the middle, and you can ignore this, you can see the little skeleton that I've set up to actually animate him. I'm going to show you how to do that in another tutorial. Now let's press Z again to go out of edit mode. Press A twice to select all of the geometry, like all of the vertices, edges or faces, depending on which mode you're in, of this little creeper. And let's come into the UV mapping options in the shading/UV tab. Let's pop this open, and this gives you a number of different options to generate your UV layouts. For one, the easiest way is to actually do a UV projection. And this is an automatic way to tell Blender to generate your UVs based on a different type of projection. So there's a cube projection, a cylinder projection, and a sphere projection. There's also a smart UV projection, which again I might touch in another tutorial. But the way the cube, cylinder, and sphere projections work is essentially imagine that this little creeper was surrounded by a cube-shaped or a sphere-shaped or a cylinder-shaped projector that projects the texture from the outside in onto this model. So with all of the vertices or edges or faces, it doesn't really matter, selected, but everything of your geometry selected. Let's simply pop open this UV mapping option, and let's simply say to use a cube projection. And this generally does work quite okay for any objects that are kind of cube shaped, and this creeper is kind of cubish. So let's just go pop this open and select cube projection. Now on the left hand side here, you can now see the UV layout that has been generated, and you can see that it kind of extends way past the UV/image editor, and that's not good. And with all of that still selected, simply press S. You can kind of scale this in, but let's just right click to cancel that operation. Because we've just did a cube projection, down at the bottom in this tool shelf, you'll see the options for set cube projection. You can actually just select to either clip to bounce, which I don't really want to do. I want to scale to bounce, so I'm just going to scale that in. So now this is our auto-generated UV layout, and it's actually pretty bad. But in order to see just how bad this is and why this won't work, let's actually get a texture applied to our model using this UV layout. Right now, in our 3D view, we obviously can't see any texture on this guy. You can change the shading mode down here at the bottom from solid over to texture, but you're still not going to see anything because we haven't loaded the texture into this image editor. Now, you can either open up an image file, or you can simply press new, and let's generate a new image. Let's call this one color grid _ text, leave everything on default, but change this generator type from blank over to color grid. Let's hit OK. Let's scroll down on the mouse wheel to zoom back out, and you can see that we've loaded this color grid texture into the UV/image editor, and you can see the UV layout, the geometry of this 3D model flattened out and splayed out over that image. But we still can't see anything in our 3D view, and that is because we're currently using the Cycles rendering engine. If you switch this over to Blender Render and you redo this process, you'll see the texture applied automatically because Blender Render uses a more simplistic material model, but I always recommend use the Cycles rendering engine, so let's leave that selected. But we now need to actually apply this texture, this color grid text that we've just generated to our model. In order to do that, over on the right hand side in the properties panel, let's just come to the third last tab, which is this little sphere here, which is the material tab. Obviously, make sure you have the creeper selected. You can also press tab to return to object mode. Make sure you have the creeper selected and go into the materials tab. And here you can see the default material applied to this model. And if you can't see all of these options and all you have is a little button here that says use nodes, just press that, and that will enable the node-based material system of the Cycles rendering engine, and you should see all of these options. And now let's pop open the surface options. Come a little bit down, you can see this color property here, which is currently white. That's the base color of our model. Over on the right hand side, you'll find this little dot, and let's press that. And in here, I can now decide what I want to assign to the color of this material. And what I want to assign is an image texture, because we have already defined an image texture over here on the left hand side. So in the color, click on this little dot. Let's select to apply an image texture. And now I can bring open this little selector here, left side of this open button. And in here, I've got my color grid text, which I've already defined. Let's select that. And now you can see how this texture is applied or wrapped onto our mesh. Let's zoom in just a little bit. Press tab to return to edit mode. And in order to really understand how this UV layout maps this texture onto the mesh, with everything selected, and while your cursor is over this UV image editor, you can also use all of the normal controls to select stuff. So let's press A to make sure everything's selected. Press G for grab. Let's drag this and keep an eye on this 3D view. And can you see how where I'm dragging this UV layout is essentially where this texture gets applied onto this mesh. So this is kind of cool, but it's really unorganized. It's really messy, right? So what we can do, and let's just try this out. Make sure everything of your creeper is selected. Again, press A if it isn't. So all of the geometry is selected. Let's come back into the shading and UVs. And under the UV mapping options, let's pop this open and let's try a sphere projection instead. And again, remember, this is as if your model was placed in the center of a sphere-shaped projector and the image was being projected inwards. So let's select that. And you can see the UV layout is vastly different. It's not improved, it's just different. But before we do anything else, you can either scale this down by pressing S and bringing it in, or let's just right click and cancel that. And again, down in the bottom of the tool shelf, because we just applied a sphere projection, let's just go scale to bounce. And yeah, it's not really working for anything that has structure, like the texture of a creeper. This won't really work. If this is just like a plain concrete texture or grass or something really plain and simple, this simple projection might be enough, but for our purposes, this just won't do. So instead, what we actually need to do, we can't really use any of these projections because they're not going to give us great results. We actually need to unwrap our model. If we select this option now, it won't actually do anything because we haven't really helped Blender in any way to unwrap this mesh. Remember that what we want to essentially do is we want to flatten this three-dimensional model out into the 2D space on this UV image editor, but imagine that this was an origami creeper, and there's just no way that you can flatten this out onto a 2D surface unless you define some cut lines, and that is exactly what we're going to have to do. You may have noticed that under the UV options, under this little drop down here, you have an option to mark a seam or clear a seam, and this is telling Blender here are some lines where you can cut this model open so that you can then actually flatten it out and create a really nice clean UV layout. So what I'm going to do, let's press A to unselect everything. Let's go into edge selection mode. Let's select one of the edges on this head here. And just to try it out, you can actually come down here into select and select linked or press Ctrl and L. And that's going to select all of the linked or connected geometry. So that's going to select the entire head of the creeper. And you'll notice that on the left side in the UV image editor, you'll only see the UV layout for the parts of the mesh that you have selected. And also note that if I now did a cube projection, that would actually only apply to the head itself, not the rest of the model. So if I now went to cube project, that didn't actually work too badly, right? I've got 5 sides projected. So I can actually now come in here and rearrange these. Let's press A to unselect, right click to select, and I'm right now in vertex selection mode here in this UV image editor. And let me just make this a little bit bigger because there's lots of options down here in the bottom right of this UV in the image editor. Let me zoom out a little bit on this side so we can still see our creeper, but we got a bit more management space in this UV image editor. And down here right now I'm in vertex selection mode. There's also edge selection mode, and again I'm going to select the edges of my UV layout. Then there's face selection mode where I can select entire faces, and then there's this island selection mode. And islands is you may have multiple faces connected together, and island select mode will select the entire island. But I can simply select one of these faces or islands. They're just by themselves right now. Press G and move that around. And on the right hand side, you can see I'm moving that face around. And so I can now position that on my texture in any way I want. Go into vertex selection mode and there, see, something didn't quite work. I've got some additional edges here, and this just hasn't really worked the way we wanted it to. So now let's just do it the manual way. Let me bring this back in. And with all of the geometry of the head still selected, let's simply select to unwrap. And again, it doesn't actually do anything because we haven't defined any seams yet. Now imagine you have a paper cube and you need to define some cut lines so you can flatten out this cube. Let's just press A to unselect everything. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the edges where I'm going to place some cuts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this edge, and that edge to kind of create like a flap. Come over to the other side, hold down Shift, select those 3 edges down here. So again, this is going to be another flap. So I kind of have 2 flaps and like a round loop. So I'm also going to have to cut that loop. What I'm going to do is I'm going to place another cut line, holding down Shift here at the bottom of this face. I'm going to now select to mark seams. Let's press A to unselect, and you can see that these edges are now red, indicating that these are actually cut lines. So Blender, when I'm unwrapping this head of this creeper, is allowed to cut those lines, to disconnect them and flatten that out. So let's select one of these edges, press Ctrl and L, remember that's to select linked, that's going to select the entire geometry of the head. Let's come over, select unwrap, and let's select to unwrap. And that looks really different. Let's select everything by pressing A. Again, let me just make this editor a little bit smaller. So I can select faces now. So these are the individual faces, and I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which are all of the 6 sides of the head of this Minecraft creeper. And now if I select island and click, this entire patch is a single connected piece because I've now told Blender enough cut lines to essentially flatten out the cube of this head. So this is now a really neat little UV layout for the head of this Minecraft creeper. Obviously, C7, D7, C8, D8 isn't really the face you'd expect from a Minecraft creeper. So now instead of using this little color grid, let's get to actually applying the actual texture we want. So let's come down to the bottom here and let's press on this little open image tab. And here I've got a texture. Again, you can download this from the website called creeper.png. Let's double click this file to bring it open, and this is the texture of the creeper. And again, the head is still kind of this little colored grid, and that's because in our material settings, our image texture is still set to that UV texture. Let's just pop this open and change this over to creeper.png. And here you can see the actual head defined. And obviously this isn't really placed the right way just yet. You can kind of tell that if I'm dragging this over here and press left mouse button to place this, that this little face here is actually the face that's going to end up on my Minecraft creeper, but the whole thing is wrongly rotated. So let's make sure everything's selected. Press R to rotate it. You can hold down Control to kind of snap it to 15 degrees. Just click right there. Press G to move it. Drag it a little bit more in place. And now the face is upside down. So let's press R again, hold down Control, and just rotate this whole thing 180 degrees. G, let's move it up a little bit. So right there is where I'd imagine the face to be. Let's just zoom in a little bit. Let's change over to vertex selection mode, and you can change this down here, or just like in the 3D view, you can just press Control and Tab, go to the vertex selection mode. So right click one of these vertices, and let's just right click and drag them to the corners here, and left click to confirm. I'm kind of just placing these 4 corners exactly where they should be. And you can see on the right hand side, I've now got my creeper face in place. So this is actually where I want this texture to be. Now, the problem is that because of the way I've generated, I've cut my little head up, I've got the rest of this island poking out here at the top, and this is kind of really odd and not really what I want. So what I actually want to do is I actually want to kind of separate the face out here so I can take these last pieces and move them somewhere else, or, you know, I could regenerate this with different cut lines. It's kind of up to you and how you want to do this, but let me just show you how you actually can disconnect faces from an island. For that, obviously, you need to go into face selection mode. Let's select the face that defines the face of the creeper. In order to disconnect a face from an island, make sure the face is selected. Let's press Y on the keyboard. And now you can't drag it by right-clicking and dragging. You actually have to press G to drag. And now if you drag it, we've disconnected this face from the rest of the island. Again, I can just kind of place it down exactly where it needs to be for this creeper face. But now if I go to island selection mode, select this island, which defines the rest of the head, I can now drag this and reposition this somewhere else. And what I might actually do, I might actually place this down, press R. Let's just rotate this around a little bit. Let's come into vertex selection mode. And I'm just going to drag these vertices where I need them to be. And I'm going to make this 2, 4, 6, 8. So I'm going to make these cubes 8 by 8 in size. So 2, 4, 6, 8. Again, I'm just going to drag these vertices in place. Again, 2, 4, 6, 8. It is a little bit clunky at this point, and obviously I'm running out of space again. But if we look around our creeper, at the bottom and the back, we already have the texture applied nicely. Just kind of the top and the sides look a little bit weird. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into face selection mode, select this face right here, press Y on my keyboard, and then G to move this face around. And there's nothing stopping you from placing these faces on top of each other, so you can just reuse the same patches of texture. And these ones here are still attached, so select them, Y and then G, and then just move them off a little bit. Again, same down here, press Y and then G. Let's move that off a little bit. And again, let's go back into vertex selection mode. I'm just going to roughly place them pretty much on top of where the other ones were. I don't need to have it to be perfect. I just kind of want them to be laid out a little bit neater. So we're starting to define, you can kind of see it's come together at the top there for the top of the creeper. And again, let's do it for this face down here. And this is just a little bit of, requires a little bit of patience, but you can see we now have the texture defined for the head of our creeper. Now, obviously the rest of the body and the legs are still missing, so let's just fairly quickly go through these and essentially repeat the same process. Let me press Z on my keyboard. Let's press A to unselect everything, and you can see the UVs have disappeared. And on the body, I'm going to select one edge on the side, and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. Let's zoom in a little bit, and this might be just slightly tricky. So 1, 2, and 3. So I've got all of these edges selected for the body. Let's select to mark seam. And obviously, if you ever select an edge that you didn't actually want to cut, you can use clear seam to remove that seam again. Let's press Z again. And yeah, that is looking all right. Z, back to wireframe. Control and L to select linked. And yes, this is the body. And let's just select to unwrap that. And that's actually looking pretty good. Let's press Z again. Let's change this over to textured mode. And that's actually not too bad. Now I have a piece of the face in there, and I think it's probably at the top end here. But what I can actually do, let's press A to select everything, press S, and let's just scale this down just a little bit. Press G, let's kind of just drag this, and it's going to reposition this a little bit. And yes, I know it's not perfect. There's a few edges that you can kind of see hanging over, and I can quite quickly fix them up. So let's just press A, select everything, press B, for the marquee selection tool, select these vertices, press G, let's just move them at least to the edge, just so that the textures are defined a little bit nicer. Unselect everything, B, let's select the ones at the top, press G, move them down just a little bit. And again, I'm just going to go through this fairly quickly because I don't want to take absolutely forever. Maybe I'll just quickly go into vertex selection mode and just kind of reposition these vertices. Cool, and yeah, it's a little bit too rough in the texture, and obviously you can kind of, chop this up and lay this out slightly differently if you want to. Let's just kind of quickly do this for the feet as well. And again, let's just start selecting some edges, and I want to make sure that you select the one for the correct foot, because otherwise you're accidentally going to cut the wrong one. Let's press Z to go into, yeah, I've got the wrong one selected. Let's just make sure I've got the right pieces and the right edges selected to unwrap this foot properly. Let's mark them as seam. Control and L to select everything, and let's unwrap that as well. Let's select everything, let's scale that down, press G, let's just place this down here on the side. Let's return to texture mode. Yep, and that's not too bad. Let's do the next foot. And I'm really just following the exact same process over and over for all of the feet. Obviously, I've sped this up a little bit for you just so that you don't get totally bored out of your mind. I'm also going to quickly redo the first foot that we did just so that all of the sides of all of the feet are exactly 4 by 4 and they're all at least uniform. Let's just make this image UV editor a little bit smaller. Let's zoom back out, press Z to exit wireframe mode. Let's change the shading mode from solid over to texture. Press A to unselect everything, tap to exit edit mode. And now we have a properly textured Minecraft creeper in Blender. Obviously, there's still a whole lot of stuff that I haven't covered yet, like texture painting and smart UV project, but hopefully this is enough to get you started and get some textures onto your models in Blender. And when you render them out, they'll come out looking a whole lot nicer. And that's all there is to it. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button. And if you want to support me in what I do on this channel, maybe pick up some awesome rewards along the way, like access to my private Discord server, be sure to check out my Patreon page. And as always, if you do have any comments, questions or suggestions, just leave them down in the section below. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I will see you later.